Welcome to History Date Night, a World War II podcast covering the Second World War in chronological order, from the opening shots to final victory. I'm Justin, and joining me is my wife and co-host, Jenny. Together we explore the people, battles, and turning points that shape the deadliest conflict in human history, one date at a time. On this episode,
clearly stated that they are not parties to this war.
Every soldier feels disgusted and repelled.
The losses look even worse than they really are.
Is about the silliest thought that I've ever heard. Welcome back to History Date Night. I'm Justin. Last episode, Timoshenko's rebuilt Red Army fell on the Mannerheim line on February 1st, and the pounding began in earnest. 300,000 shells on day one, wave after wave of infantry, 5 or 6 assaults a day regardless of casualties. This episode covers February 5th through the 10th. The assault continues and deepens. The Allied Supreme War Council makes a decision about Finland and Norway that is more about iron ore than it is about Finns. A propaganda campaign makes Britain a little more careful about what it says on the trains. And Roosevelt stands in the rain on the White House lawn and tells 4,500 booing students that their resolution was the silliest thing he had heard in 58 years of living. Let's get into it.
I'm Jenny. This week also has the general who might have saved France being shuffled off to East Prussia, the Łódź Ghetto, formally established, a German spy who walked into a consulate and volunteered to betray everything he'd just been recruited for, a French soldier capturing a German prisoner who will one day run the Vichy secret police, Tom and Jerry making their debut under different names, and up to 400 shells per minute falling on a 10-mile stretch of Finnish forest.
On February 5th in Paris, the Anglo-French Supreme War Council meets, Chamberlain and Churchill representing Britain, Daladier for France, and makes a decision that looks, on the surface, like a decision about Finland. The Council agrees to send a military force of 2 to 4 divisions to aid Finland via Norway. The target date for landing at Narvik, Norway, is around March 20th.
Narvik, a Norwegian port city above the Arctic Circle, roughly 120 miles north of the Swedish border, on one of the deep fords that cut into Norway's northwestern coast. Narvik matters not because of Finland, but because it's where the iron ore railway from the Swedish mines reaches the sea. Germany imports roughly 10 million tons of Swedish iron ore annually, and most of it travels by ship down the Norwegian coast from Narvik. We've been building to this point since the early episodes of the series, when Admiral Raeder first proposed invading Norway to protect that route, and when Churchill first proposed mining Norwegian waters to cut it.
The Supreme War Council's plan is considerably more ambitious than it sounds. The troops aren't just going to march through to Finland. The plan, as subsequently described, involves landing not only at Narvik, but simultaneously at Stavanger, Bergen, and Trondheim, Norway's 3 other major port cities. This is, effectively, a major intervention in Norway under the cover of helping Finland. And since the force would march through to Sweden on the way to Finland, it would also take control of the Swedish iron ore mines at Gällivare in northern Sweden.
Norway's neutrality, ignored. Sweden's neutrality, also ignored. Both countries have clearly stated that they are not parties to this war. The plan notes this as a diplomatic problem to be managed, not a reason to reconsider. The pretext, aiding Finland, is described even in internal Allied documents as most unconvincing. One assessment uses the words vague, irresolute, and amateurish. Chamberlain states publicly that Finland must not be allowed to disappear from the map. He privately knows that the landing force cannot reach Finland before mid-April at the earliest. Finland has, at best, just weeks left.
The decision matters beyond its immediate consequences, because it shows that both sides are thinking about Norway at exactly the same time. Germany has been planning Weserübung, Operation Weser Exercise, the invasion of Norway and Denmark since January. The Allies have just voted to effectively occupy Norway's major ports. 2 forces moving toward the same objective in the same month. The Norwegian campaign is now inevitable. The only question is, whose boots touch the ground first?
And while the Supreme War Council makes its plans in Paris, Finland's Foreign Minister Väinö Tanner is in Stockholm, meeting with the Soviet ambassador Alexandra Kollontai. Kollontai is a unique figure of history. She was the daughter of a general of the Russian Imperial Army and as a teenager embraced socialist ideologies. With time, she would become the first woman in history to be a cabinet minister, one of the first women to be appointed as a diplomatic representative of a modern state, and the first to be promoted to the rank of ambassador. Tanner tells Kollontai that Finland wants peace and is willing to cede territory. The Soviets have already signaled, through Swedish diplomatic channels, that they're willing to negotiate with the real Finnish government. But both sides know that the terms demanded have grown since last autumn. Blood has been shed. Soviet honor demands more than it demanded in October. And as long as the Red Army thinks it can win decisively on the battlefield, Stalin sees no reason to offer Finland generous terms. The peace negotiations and the artillery barrage proceed simultaneously.
Let's go to the Karelian Isthmus, where the Suma sector of the Mannerheim line is being reduced to rubble. By February 7th, Soviet troops have been attacking the Suma Gap for 7 consecutive days. By February 9th, around this 1 10-mile sector, up to 400 artillery shells are falling every minute. The Russian guns are so densely packed that observers describe them as standing virtually wheel to wheel.
The Soviet approach this week is different from anything that they tried back in December. Rather than sending infantry in dense human waves and hoping they'll break through, Timoshenko has introduced armored sledges, troop-carrying vehicles on skis known as aerosani, armed with machine guns that dash forward laying smoke screens, drop off their troops, and push through. Tanks then follow through the smoke, each accompanied by a group of soldiers, to attack Finnish positions directly. The Finns cannot send out anti-tank squads in these conditions without being cut down, and they don't have enough anti-tank weaponry to cope with the armored weight bearing down on them.
On February 9th, Soviet troops take control of a bunker near the village of Karula, a point of the Mannerheim line that had withstood everything thrown at it since November. The Finns counterattack, but they fail to retake it. This is the first permanent Soviet gain inside the Mannerheim line. Mannerheim, at his headquarters in Mikkeli, is receiving desperate pleas from the frontline commanders begging for his reserve, the 5th Division. He refuses to release it. He is convinced that the reports contain an element of panic, that the line still holds, that the 5th Division must be kept intact for the decisive moments still to come.
By the end of the week, Mannerheim has been proven technically correct. The line still holds at week's end, but at what cost? Finnish artillery is so depleted that the order has been issued. Do not fire a single shell except to fight off a direct attack that cannot be stopped with small arms alone. The Finns are rationing ammunition as the Soviets fire up to 400 shells per minute. And this week, remember, is only the prelude. Timoshenko has told his commanders that February 11th is when the real offensive begins.
Stalin himself is impatient. He's been told by his Air Force that many Finnish bridges have been destroyed and trains crippled. Stalin's response, as recorded by Khrushchev in his memoirs, says, "The Finns only have their skis left." Finland has been fighting for 72 days on skis, on rationed ammunition, and at temperatures reaching minus 40 Celsius. The question is not whether Finland can hold indefinitely. The question is, how much longer can it hold?
February 6th, Britain. The Ministry of Information, which has been a source of well-documented embarrassment since the war began, finally launches a propaganda campaign that works. Careless talk costs lives. 2.5 million posters are distributed to offices, hotels, shops, banks, and pubs across the country. The posters warn against sharing information that might reach enemy agents. The message is delivered with wit, which is probably why it landed.
The cartoonist of this comic, known as Falgassi, whose real name was Kenneth Bird, has drawn a series of images showing Hitler eavesdropping from train luggage racks, hiding inside telephone kiosks, and concealed in framed portraits hanging on the walls of private rooms. Another artist, named Norman Wilkinson, has painted a torpedoed ship sinking with the caption, "A few careless words may end in this." A third shows an attractive woman leaning toward 2 officers at a club bar with the caption, "Keep mum, she's not so dumb." The posters are snappy, memorable, and visually arresting. They are the first Ministry of Information products that the public actually responds to with something other than contempt. Compare them to the earlier effort that read, "Do not discuss anything which might be of national importance. The consequence of any such indiscretion may be the loss of many lives," versus "Careless talk costs lives," which said the same message, but was actually remembered.
Also, on February 6th, the BBC reaches an agreement with the Admiralty on reporting. Sinkings of small ships may be mentioned only once in a news bulletin. Larger ships can still be reported in consecutive bulletins. The government is worried that accurate, zealous reporting is making British naval losses look even worse than they really are. It is a strange tension. The BBC's credibility depends on accurate reporting, but the government needs to manage morale. The solution is rationing the repetition, not suppressing the actual facts.
February 8th in New York City, a man named William Siebold arrives from Genoa, Italy, carrying special photographic equipment, including something called a microdot, a technique for hiding messages in photographs so small they can only be read under a microscope. Siebold is a German-born naturalized American citizen who returned to Germany in 1939 to visit his mother, and while there, was recruited by German military intelligence. He was told he had no choice. But on his way home, he stopped at the American consulate in Cologne and told the officials everything. The FBI was waiting for him when he arrived in America. For the next year and a half, Siebold runs a genuine German spy network in New York City while feeding everything he receives to the FBI. His testimony in 1941 convicts 33 German agents, essentially destroying Germany's espionage network in the United States within a single trial. His story becomes the basis for a 1945 movie called The House on 92nd Street. He is one of the more successful double agents of the entire war.
We followed General Johannes Blaskowitz since he received Warsaw's surrender in September and allowed the Polish officers to keep their swords. We followed his letters of complaint to Hitler about SS atrocities, which Hitler has received and ignored. This week, the complaints continue and begin to spread to other senior officers. General Wilhelm Uhlex, Blaskowitz's subordinate, writes to his commander that the escalating SS violence against the civilian population shows, in his words, a lack of humanity and morals, and concludes that the only solution I can see to this revolting situation, which sullies the honor of the entire German people, is that all police formations, together with all their senior commanders, should be dismissed in a body and their units disbanded.
On February 6th, Blaskowitz compiles a list of murders and rapes of Poles and Jews committed by German SS and police units, along with the systemic looting of local property. He notes that his officers' attitude toward the SS alternates between abhorrence and hatred, and that every soldier feels disgusted and repelled by these crimes committed in Poland by nationals of the Reich and representatives of our state. The list and the complaints are forwarded up the chain of command. The result? Uhlex is eventually relieved of command of the 10th Army Corps. Hans Frank, governing from Wawel Castle, will go to Hitler this week to demand that Blaskowitz himself be dismissed. Hitler declines, but notes Blaskowitz with displeasure. The complaints are sidelined, and the officers raising them find themselves increasingly isolated. The atrocities will continue daily.
February 8th. An official Nazi decree formally establishes the Łódź Ghetto. Łódź is Poland's second largest city, roughly 75 miles southwest of Warsaw, about the distance from New York City to Philadelphia, a major textile and industrial center. Before the war, it had a Jewish population of around 230,000, nearly a third of the entire city. The decree now formally confines them to a designated area. Within months, the Łódź Ghetto will be sealed physically and will hold 270,000 people in an area that had previously only housed 60,000. By the time it is liquidated in 1944, more than 200,000 of those people will be dead.
On February 10th, Jews from Stettin, a port city in northwestern Germany on the Baltic coast, now known as the Polish city of Szczecin and Stralsund, are deported to the ghettos in Lublin. These are German Jews being deported to occupied Poland. The pattern we've been watching since September, Jewish communities being progressively identified, restricted, and stripped of property, now being moved east, is extending well beyond the occupied Poland into Germany itself.
Now, a brief stop in Asia, because this week gives us the clearest picture yet of why the Sino-Japanese War has reached a stalemate that neither side can break. Japan has been occupying more and more Chinese territory, but rather than solving its resource shortages, which was the original justification for expansion, occupation has intensified them. Japan now bears responsibility for administering and supplying territories containing roughly 100 million people, much of which consists of food importing regions. Last year, Japan had to ship 6 million bags of Australian rice into its own occupation zone to keep the population fed. The Nationalist Army is not going to be defeated anytime soon. Japan cannot withdraw without losing face after filling its public with tales of victory. The Chinese Communist forces, apart from the nationalists, represent a separate problem Japan cannot ignore. And Manchukuo shares a long border with the Soviet Union, which means that Japan can't simply strip its garrison there to reinforce the China War. The situation is, as one analyst put it, nothing but grim for either side, with no ending even remotely in sight.
On February 9th in Washington, D.C., Roosevelt announces he is sending Under-Secretary of State Sumner Welles on a fact-finding mission to the major European capitals, Rome, Berlin, Paris, and London. Officially, the mission is to gather information on the possibilities of a just and lasting peace. Privately, Roosevelt concedes to advisors that the chances of finding a peaceful solution to the war are remote. The mission is partly about intelligence gathering, partly about appearing to explore every option before America becomes more deeply involved, and partly about maintaining Roosevelt's domestic political position as a president who tried everything.
February 10th, at the South Portico of the White House. It is raining, and President Roosevelt is standing outside in the rain because 4,500 members of the American Youth Congress have marched up Constitutional Avenue with banners, condemning American aid to Finland as an attempt to force America into an imperialistic war against the Soviet Union. The American Youth Congress had passed a resolution to this effect. Roosevelt has invited them to the White House. He addresses them directly, right there in the rain.
He says, quote, that American sympathy is 98% with the Finns in their effort to stave off invasion of their own soil is by now axiomatic. That America wants to help them by lending or giving money to them to save their own lives is also axiomatic today. That the Soviet Union would, because of this, declare war on the United States is about the silliest thought that I've ever heard advanced in the 58 years of my life. That we are going to war ourselves with the Soviet Union is an equally silly thought. End quote. The American Youth Congress boos the President of the United States. Roosevelt stands in the rain and does not flinch. Politically, the moment also serves as a public demonstration that Roosevelt is willing to criticize Soviet aggression, despite domestic accusations that aid to Finland risks widening the war.
February 9th brings another development that will matter enormously later. General Erich von Manstein, the general who has been arguing for months that the planned invasion of France through Belgium is too predictable and will fail, and who has the alternative Ardennes plan that will actually work, is transferred from his post as Chief of Staff of Army Group A to command of the 38th Army Corps in East Prussia. It is described as a promotion. It removes him from Western invasion planning and gets him out of the room where the arguments happen. General Halder, the Army Chief of Staff, has grown tired of Manstein's memoranda. The transfer is his solution.
Here's the thing about this removal. It doesn't work. Hitler, who's been intrigued by the Ardennes idea since learning of it, arranges to meet personally with Manstein's Corps Commander Group on February 17th, a farewell visit to the outgoing commanders being transferred, though Hitler asks Manstein to stay behind. In that private conversation, Manstein lays out his plan directly. Hitler emerges from the meeting more convinced than ever that the Ardennes should become the decisive axis of the invasion. Halder's attempt to remove the inconvenient general from the debate instead gives that general a private audience with the Fuhrer. That move really did not work out for Halder.
February 10th also brings two quieter pieces of good news. HMS Salve and HMS Servitor, two wooden-hulled minesweepers, successfully sweep a magnetic mine using a new technique, a long electrified cable towed through the water that detonates the mines in their wakes. The wooden hulls don't trigger the mine's magnetic sensors. The countermeasure, developed since the mine was defused in November, is working operationally. And Glenn Miller's In the Mood reaches number 1 on the Billboard chart on February 10th. It will stay for 13 weeks. Tom and Jerry make their debut in an MGM short called Puss Gets the Boot, though Tom is named Jasper and Jerry has no name at all yet. And Pinocchio premiered 3 days earlier at Radio City Music Hall, containing When You Wish Upon a Star. The world keeps making art while the Mannerheim line absorbs up to 400 shells per minute.
So, the Allies vote to occupy Norway's major ports under the pretext of helping Finland, while knowing they'll probably be too late. The Mannerheim line is still holding, but barely. Artillery rationed, reserves withheld, and up to 400 shells per minute falling on a 10-mile front. Blaskowitz compiles his list of SS atrocities and the complaints are sidelined. Łódź is formally sealed. A double agent arrives in New York with a microdot camera and begins dismantling German espionage in America. Roosevelt stands in the rain and verbally defends Finland to a booing crowd. Manstein is shuffled off east to East Prussia, then given the audience that helps change the invasion of France. Next episode, February 11th, the decisive Soviet assault, the beginning of the end of the Winter War. Thanks for joining us for episode 21 of History Date Night. We'll see you next time.
See you then.